What if I told you that the ultimate secret to success isn't found in, a gleaming boardroom or a prestigious university textbook or even a sudden stroke of lucky timing,
Right.
but actually it's found in the darkest, most terrifying moments of absolute despair?
I mean, I want you to imagine this scenario for a second.
Okay, paint the picture.
You're this young, incredibly ambitious person, right? And you somehow manage to get a private audience with the richest, most powerful industrialist in the entire world.
Andrew Carnegie.
Exactly. You walk into his office expecting, I don't know, maybe a small investment or a job recommendation.
It's a little leg up.
Yeah. But instead, he looks you dead in the eye and offers to handpick you to crack the universal code of human achievement.
Which sounds amazing at first.
It sounds like winning the lottery.
Okay.
Then he drops the conditions. He tells you that you will not get paid a single cent for 20 years.
Wow.
You have to fund the entire project yourself, and your primary job for the next 2 decades is to obsessively study miserable, broken, unsuccessful people.
Yeah, thousands of them. So my question to you is, would you take that deal? And more importantly, could you actually survive it?
I mean, it's an almost incomprehensible premise for anyone living in our modern instant gratification culture.
Totally.
Because we're looking at a man who essentially signed a quarter-century contract to obsessively dissect the anatomy of success.
Yeah.
Yet, right in the messy middle of all that grueling research, he found himself utterly paralyzed by the exact same psychological failures he was supposed to be mapping out.
He didn't just study failure, he was completely consumed by it.
Exactly. He was drowning in it.
So today, we are taking a massive, comprehensive deep dive into the origin story of one of the most famous, debated, and influential success philosophies in modern history.
It really is a foundational text.
It is. We are focusing entirely on chapter 1 of a manuscript that was considered so radioactive, so provocative, that it was actually hidden away in a vault for 72 years.
Which is just wild to think about.
Right. We're talking about the opening sequence of Napoleon Hill's Outwitting the Devil, specifically his first fateful meeting with Andrew Carnegie and the domino effect it caused.
The absolute chaos that followed.
Yeah, exactly. You are about to learn how the greatest, most immovable barrier to whatever you want out of life is actually a highly specific type of fear manufactured entirely in your own mind.
And it's a fear most people don't even realize they have.
Right. And even more surprisingly, we're going to explore why hitting absolute rock bottom, like the kind of bottom where you lose your courage, your ambition, your dignity, might actually be the exact mechanical trigger required to awaken a hidden, virtually unstoppable version of yourself.
The other self.
Yes. So for anyone trying to build a business, navigate a chaotic career, or simply, take back the steering wheel of their own mind, understanding the psychological turning points in this chapter is absolutely non-negotiable.
The historical context surrounding this text adds such a fascinating layer to the mechanics of what he's actually describing here.
Oh, for sure. Set the stage for us.
Well, we're analyzing a manuscript written in 1938.
Right. Great.
This is a man coming right off the explosive global success of his magnum opus, Think and Grow Rich.
Which was a massive hit.
Huge.
Right.
By all societal metrics, he should have been taking a victory lap. Just enjoying the wealth and the accolades.
Sitting on a beach somewhere.
Exactly. But instead, he sits down at a typewriter and produces this profound, deeply uncomfortable, incredibly raw look in the mirror.
He really exposes himself.
He does. He exposes his own cowardice, his profound periods of shame, and his own self-sabotage.
Which is probably why his family locked it away, right?
Oh, absolutely. The material was considered so potentially damaging to his brand as this flawless success guru and so antagonistic to certain societal structures that they just hid it.
That's crazy.
It wasn't until recent years with annotations by Sharon Lechter to kind of frame it for a modern audience that the world finally got to read it.
And chapter 1 really is the crucible for all of this.
It's the furnace where the entire philosophy was forged. It details that Carnegie meeting and then the subsequent 20 years of absolute chaos.
Let's talk about the atmosphere of that initial 1908 meeting, because that's where we really need to set the foundation.
Yeah, put us in the room.
So we have our author, this young, hungry guy who manages to land a sit-down with Andrew Carnegie. And at this time, Carnegie is the titan of the steel industry.
He's effectively the wealthiest man walking the earth.
Right. Now, the author's original plan going into this room was highly practical. He basically wanted to go to law school, which was expensive, and he figured he could pay his tuition by interviewing highly successful men and writing profile stories about them for various magazines.
It was a very solid, logical hustle.
It makes sense,
It
right?
was a highly rational plan. I mean, he was looking for a very simple transactional exchange of value.
Right, tit for tat.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He gets proximity to power, he writes an article, he gets a check, and he pays for law school.
Mm.
He was thinking entirely in terms of immediate survival and conventional career progression.
But Carnegie listens to this pitch, and he sees something entirely different in this kid.
He completely flips the board on
He
her.
really does. Carnegie throws down a challenge of staggering proportions. He proposes that this young man dedicate the next 20 years of his life to organizing all the scattered, unwritten causes of failure and success into one comprehensive, unified philosophy of personal achievement.
20 years.
20 years. And Carnegie makes it crystal clear. He says, I will not subsidize you.
That's the kicker.
Yeah, there is no salary, no stipend, no safety net at all. He has to earn his own living in the chaotic free market while doing this monumental research on the side.
Which is just a brutal condition.
But the detail that really twists the knife, the part that defies all conventional logic, is Carnegie's insistence that he must study failures.
Thousands of them.
Thousands. Carnegie tells him to go find people who have reached the end of their lives feeling bitter, broken, and defeated and analyze them.
You know, that specific instruction completely upends the conventional wisdom we still hold today about how a person is supposed to achieve greatness.
Right, because we're always told to do the exact opposite.
Exactly. We're constantly told to model success, find mentors, copy the habits of billionaires, wake up at 4 a.m., all that stuff.
All right, mirror the winners.
But Carnegie tells him that he needs to put the vast majority of his analytical focus on the mechanics of defeat.
Why, though? It seems so counterproductive.
Well, the reasoning Carnegie offers is incredibly profound. He observes that schools and universities do an adequate job of teaching abstract knowledge like mathematics, history, literature, but they teach absolutely zero about the actual art of living.
That's very true.
They don't teach the internal mechanics of individual achievement or how to navigate the inevitable devastating blows of human existence.
But I mean, that concept alone requires a serious pause because the mechanics of it seem entirely counterintuitive to how we understand brain plasticity today.
How do you mean?
Well, if I decide I want to become a world-class architect, I don't spend 20 years studying collapsed bridges and crumbling foundations, right?
You study what works.
Exactly. I study structural integrity. I look at the Pantheon. I look at skyscrapers. My assumption would be that immersing yourself in the stories of thousands of bitter, defeated people would just program your subconscious mind with a blueprint for negativity.
You think you'd just be marinating in despair.
Yeah, I'd just be depressed all the time.
The paradox you're pointing out is exactly what makes Carnegie's hypothesis so brilliant, and we really need to break down the underlying cognitive mechanism at play here.
Break it down for me.
So Carnegie understood that success is highly contextual. The specific tactics a steel magnate uses might not work for an artist or a politician or a tech founder.
Okay, that makes sense.
However, the architecture of failure is almost entirely universal.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Carnegie posits that you will learn infinitely more about how to succeed from the failures because they reveal the hidden tripwires of the human mind. The failures map out the exact locations of the psychological landmines.
So they show you where not to step.
Precisely. But we have to go even deeper into Carnegie's core philosophy here. Carnegie didn't believe failure was an external event.
What do you mean?
He didn't believe it was, the market crashing, or a competitor undercutting you, or a bad harvest. He believed that the vast majority of what we label as failures are actually purely synthetic limitations that individuals construct and validate in their own minds.
Okay, wait. So you're saying the external event might be like the factory literally burns down or the bank calls in the loan, but the failure itself is just the internal decision to accept that event as a permanent stop sign.
That is the exact distinction, yes.
Yeah.
Carnegie is trying to teach him that success is not a separate external force that you hunt down and capture.
It's an internal thing.
Right. It is a completely intangible, dormant capacity inside the individual's neurology. Carnegie introduces this concept of the other self.
The other self.
And the most vital characteristic of this other self is that it is fundamentally lazy, or at least it's incredibly efficient.
Meaning it doesn't do more work than it has to.
Exactly. It rarely, if ever, shows up when the seas are calm and things are going your way. It prefers to remain asleep.
Interesting.
This dormant power usually only reveals its presence during an unusual severe emergency. It requires a scenario where an individual is backed into a corner through severe adversity and temporary defeat, completely stripped of their normal resources and forced to literally change their mental habits and think their way out of a seemingly impossible difficulty.
Right. And if we translate that into modern terms, it's like the concept of muscle hypertrophy in weightlifting.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right, because the muscle does not grow when you're lifting a weight that feels comfortable.
No, not at all.
The growth, the actual biological adaptation, only triggers in those final agonizing repetitions where the muscle fibers actually tear and fail. So hitting a wall isn't a sign that you should stop. The wall is literally the prerequisite friction required to force the adaptation.
That analogy maps perfectly onto Carnegie's psychological framework.
Right.
Carnegie asserts that a human being is never quite so close to massive breakthrough success as when that which they falsely label failure has just overtaken them.
Because that's the point of maximum friction.
Yes. The temporary defeat is merely an environmental signal. It's an alert from reality telling you to reevaluate your assumptions and rearm yourself with a new plan.
It's just data.
Exactly, it's data. Carnegie believed that if most of these failures had just possessed the emotional endurance to go one step further, to push past the panic of the initial defeat, they would have discovered the flaw in their plan and succeeded.
Which brings up one of the most visceral, haunting examples included in the annotator's notes regarding a man named R.U. Darby.
Ah, the gold mine story.
Yeah, it's a story that perfectly illustrates this exact cognitive trap. So Darby was operating during the gold rush era, right? An environment purely driven by the prospect of sudden, massive wealth.
Gold fever.
Exactly. Darby goes out west, stakes a claim, starts digging, and he actually hits a vein of gold ore. It's real.
Extracts it.
He secures the backing, gets the heavy mining machinery, and starts pulling the ore out of the ground. He is on his way to becoming incredibly wealthy. And then, abruptly, the vein just vanishes.
Poof.
The drill hits nothing but dirt and rock.
The external environment changes. The initial plan stops working.
Right, the external friction appears. And Darby reacts exactly the way the logical, unadapted mind reacts. He panics, he gets deeply frustrated, and he accepts the disappearance of the vein as a permanent, immovable fact.
He gives up.
He gives up entirely. He sells off all his expensive mining machinery and the rights to the claim to a local town junkman for absolute pennies on the dollar just to wash his hands of the whole miserable affair. And he takes a train back home in total defeat.
And here is where we observe the crucial difference between the mind that accepts defeat and the mind that uses defeat as a diagnostic tool.
What does the junkman do differently?
Well, the junkman who buys the equipment doesn't just blindly start drilling in the same empty hole, hoping for a different result.
Right, that would be insane.
He acknowledges the temporary reality, the gold isn't there anymore, but he doesn't accept it as a permanent condition. So he brings in a mining engineer,
An expert.
a technical expert, to read the geological environment.
And the engineer analyzes the soil, studies the fault lines, and calculates that the vein of gold didn't just evaporate into thin air, right? The earth just shifted.
Exactly.
A fault line displaced the vein. The engineer tells the junkman exactly where to redirect the drill based on that geological shift. The junkman starts digging again, and he strikes the massive continuation of that exact same gold vein just 3 feet from where Darby had stopped drilling.
3 feet.
3 feet. Darby walked away from unimaginable generational wealth because he let a geological shift convince him that the game was entirely over. He accepted a temporary structural defeat as a permanent personal failure.
And analyzing that exact mechanism is why Carnegie wanted 20 years of research.
It makes so much sense now.
The application of this concept is vital. When an individual faces a severe economic blow, a lost job, a bankrupt company, a devastating market shift, the natural biological impulse is to act like Darby.
To just pack up and go home.
The impulse is to assume the well has dried up and abandon the quest entirely out of exhaustion and despair.
Yeah.
But the mechanics of Carnegie's philosophy demand that we view that crushing, overwhelming sense of failure as nothing more than a system alert.
A check engine light.
Perfect. Yes. It is an environmental requirement forcing you to think differently, to bring in the metaphorical engineer, and to approach the problem from a new angle. You cannot stop when you are 3 feet from the gold, because the failure state is the exact condition required to force the evolution of your strategy.
But the real tension in this chapter is that understanding this concept intellectually and actually living it out in real time are two vastly different experiences, as our author is about to demonstrate in spectacular fashion.
Oh, absolutely. He struggles with it massively.
Right. He accepts Carnegie's 20-year unpaid challenge. You would assume the narrative from here is a clean, heroic, upward trajectory, like, I have my grand mission, I am energized, let's go build the philosophy.
You'd think so.
But instead, what follows is a bizarre, chaotic, deeply frustrating period where he spends years afflicted by a psychological condition he diagnoses as the disease of indecision.
He's just drifting.
He bounces rapidly from one massive success to another, but he is completely, inexplicably miserable.
The sheer velocity of his career changes during this window is dizzying. And we really need to look at the caliber of what he was walking away from to understand the depth of this self-sabotage here.
Let's hear it.
So he takes a position as the advertising manager at LaSalle Extension University in Chicago. It's a prestigious role. He excels at it.
He's making good money.
Exactly. Everything is functioning beautifully for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then he is suddenly overcome by this violent, irrational dislike for the position, and he just abruptly resigns.
He just unplugs himself from a winning scenario.
Just walks away.
And it becomes a pattern. He goes on to become the president of the Betsy Roth Candy Company. A minor disagreement arises with his business associates, and instead of navigating the conflict like a typical executive, he just throws his hands up and walks away again.
Wild.
Then, following that, he founds a school of advertising and salesmanship. It is a highly lucrative venture, generating cash rapidly. But the moment World War I breaks out, he liquidates his involvement in that perfectly sound, wealth-generating business to go do public relations work for the government.
We really have to emphasize the sheer scale of the financial momentum he was just casually abandoning.
It was a small change.
Not at all. He decides to start a magazine called The Golden Rule. He launches this publication with literally zero capital. He builds it from the ground up, and within 12 months, he secures a nationwide circulation of 500,000 readers.
That is insane for that era.
It's massive. He ends that first year with a net profit of over $3,100. Now, the annotations provide the necessary historical adjustment. In 1918 currency, factoring in the purchasing power of the era, that is roughly equivalent to a $45,000 profit today.
Generated entirely out of thin air.
Exactly. He empirically proved he had the unique capacity to materialize wealth and build major enterprises. Yet, the more wildly he succeeded in these ventures, the more deeply discontented he became.
He uses such a specific, visceral phrase to describe it. He says he felt a germ of discontentment multiplying inside him.
A germ of discontentment.
Yeah, he describes feeling constantly fidgety, like he couldn't sit still in his own success. He goes on to train a massive army of 3,000 salespeople, and he nets $30,000 in a mere 6 months.
Which is life-changing money in the early 1920s.
An absolute fortune. And what is his next move? He steps out again. He just quits.
Why?
He admits he had no reasonable, logical excuse for doing so. His peers thought he had lost his mind, and he confesses in the text that he largely agreed with them.
He couldn't even explain it to himself.
No, he was tearing down his own empires as fast as he could build them. And all of this manic, self-destructive behavior culminates in 1923, where he finds himself entirely stranded in Columbus, Ohio.
Rock bottom.
He has no money left, no active business plan, and he is paralyzed by this overwhelming indecision. I look at this scenario, and it feels incredibly familiar to me.
How so?
It is like being dropped into the middle of an incredibly dense, dangerous jungle. You have a perfectly calibrated top-of-the-line compass in your pocket because he literally possessed the 17 principles of success he had been studying, but you are so overwhelmed by panic and a lack of clear destination that you just keep running in tight circles until you collapse.
That's a powerful image.
He knew the mechanics of achievement better than anyone alive, but he had no idea how to turn the wrench on his own psychology.
You know, exploring the mechanics of why a highly competent person does this is essential. Why do we systematically self-sabotage? Why does someone who clearly possesses the golden touch, who can generate wealth at will, keep detonating their own stability? The psychological analysis here is the key to the entire chapter.
Let's unpack it.
We tend to conflate financial velocity with purpose, but financial success, no matter how grand, does not equal internal alignment with one's core mission.
Right.
Underneath the conscious surface of his mind, he was artificially manufacturing his own crises, quitting those high-status jobs, walking away from massive payouts, because his conscious day-to-day actions were in direct, violent opposition to his inner directive.
Which was the 20-year Carnegie mandate.
Exactly.
So his subconscious mind is essentially acting like an emergency brake because his conscious ego is distracted by the shiny objects, magazine profits, the candy company title. The deeper part of his psyche keeps hitting the eject button to force him off the wrong highway.
That is the exact mechanism, and we observe this exact pathology constantly in the modern workforce.
Oh, all the time.
Consider the highly capable professional who executes the societal playbook perfectly. They get the advanced degree, they secure the six-figure corporate director role, they buy the beautiful property in the suburbs.
They did everything right.
On paper, they have won the game. But internally, they are suffering from that exact same fidgety germ of discontentment.
Yeah, that quiet misery.
And inevitably, we watch them unconsciously detonate their own lives. They start blowing past critical deadlines, they snap at a senior partner in meeting, or they just impulsively resign on a Tuesday afternoon without a backup plan.
And everyone around them thinks they're crazy.
The conscious brain views this as madness, but the internal self is desperately seeking true alignment with a deeper purpose, and it will destroy an unfulfilling structure to force a rebuild.
Man, when we look at indecision through that lens, it completely changes how we should react to feeling stuck.
It's not a flaw.
Right. Indecision isn't just a weakness or a character flaw. It is a highly sensitive diagnostic instrument. If you are sitting in a job or a business that looks incredible on paper, but you have that persistent, gnawing, fidgety sensation in your gut, it is a blaring alarm siren.
It's telling you something is wrong.
It's an indication that the trajectory you are on, no matter how profitable, is completely misaligned with your actual capacity or purpose. The requirement here is to use that internal friction to force a deep, uncomfortable analysis of your direction, rather than just numbing it or waiting until you unconsciously burn the whole thing down and find yourself stranded with zero capital.
Because the rule of this psychological mechanism is absolute. If you refuse to consciously force the analysis and change course, your subconscious mind will eventually manufacture an external emergency severe enough to force you to change.
It'll make the choice for you.
Exactly. And that brings us directly to the rock bottom moment in Columbus, Ohio.
The atmosphere of this turning point is incredibly stark. It is late 1923. He is completely stranded in Columbus. He is broke, and he is suffocating under the weight of this paralyzing indecision.
It's just totally ska.
The tension becomes so physically unbearable that he decides he just has to move his body to process the anxiety. He leaves the house and walks 7 or 8 miles out into the desolate countryside.
That's a long walk.
Yeah, and as he is walking, he experiences a massive physiological and psychological shift. He describes the environment around him seeming to go completely dark, followed by a sensation of high-vibrating energy flooding his system.
Like an adrenaline rush almost.
And out of that energy, a clear command formulates in his mind.
You know, he is careful to articulate that he didn't hear a hallucinated voice in his ear.
Right, he wasn't hearing things.
It was an internal thought that arrived with such overwhelming force and clarity that it functioned as a command.
What did it say?
The thought dictated that the period of drifting was over. The time had arrived to complete the philosophy of achievement. It ordered him to immediately return home and begin producing the actual manuscripts.
Wow.
He identifies this specific moment on the dark road as the first undeniable awakening of his other self.
And the environmental timing of his return home is what provides the final devastating emotional blow needed to really break his resistance.
This part is so heartbreaking.
It really is. He walks back from the country, processing this massive internal directive. He approaches his home, and he suddenly realizes it is Christmas Eve.
Oh, man.
He looks toward his house, and he sees his 3 little boys standing at the window, staring intently out at the neighbor's house next door. He follows their gaze and sees that the neighbors are decorating a massive, brilliantly lit Christmas tree.
The contrast there.
Yeah, and in that moment, the reality of his financial self-sabotage comes crashing down on him. He realizes, with an agonizing, suffocating distress, that he cannot afford a tree for his own children.
Just crushing guilt.
There will be no Christmas in his house. Watching the quiet disappointment on his children's faces completely breaks his ego.
That specific, agonizing, emotional low point was the necessary catalyst. The intellectual realization on the road wasn't enough. He needed the absolute heartbreak to shatter the paralysis of his indecision.
Logic wasn't enough. He needed the pain.
Exactly. The shame of failing his children bypassed all his logical defenses. He walked into the house, went straight to his typewriter, and began to work.
Finally.
And he notes that as he rolled the first sheet of blank paper into the machine, that same high-vibrating energy returned. The internal voice clarified his situation.
What did it tell him?
It told him that he had been an incredibly stubborn, resistant student. He had spent years trying to outrun his appointed task, and the only way to cure him of that arrogance was to subject him to profound disappointment and poverty.
The manuscript even details how this internal voice predicted an incoming global economic catastrophe, which we can retroactively identify as the Great Depression, right?
Yes, the timing lines up perfectly.
Stating that millions of people were about to lose everything and would desperately require the philosophy he was supposed to be writing. So, fueled by this profound clarity and guilt, he sits at that typewriter and he works furiously. For 3 straight months, he pours everything out, finalizing the massive manuscripts in early 1924.
He finally surrenders to the mission. He aligns his conscious action with his subconscious purpose.
But the narrative immediately takes a doubly frustrating turn, which I think is actually the most brutally honest part of the entire chapter.
It's so human.
It is. He experiences this cinematic, magical moment of clarity. He does the grueling work. He finishes the project. And then almost immediately, he reverts to his old, chaotic patterns.
He just shells it.
He takes the finished manuscript, essentially puts it on a shelf, and goes out and buys a commercial business college in Cleveland.
Unbelievable.
He throws himself into expanding it. He doubles the enrollment, and then he gets bored, hands the management over to associates, and wanders off on a public speaking tour. Why on earth does this happen?
It's baffling.
We assume that once someone experiences a profound, life-altering awakening, they are permanently cured. Why is it mechanically so difficult to maintain that alignment?
Well, what he describes here is a universal psychological phenomenon he terms doubt makes its appearance.
Doubt.
We have to understand the primary function of the logical conscious brain. Its main directive is to maintain homeostasis, to keep you safe in this familiar environment, even if that familiar environment is toxic or unfulfilling.
It prefers familiar pain to unknown success.
Precisely. The moment the intense emotional energy of his Columbus breakthrough began to fade, his analytical, fearful brain reasserted control, began to relentlessly rationalize away the profound calling.
How did it rationalize it?
His reason stepped in and presented a highly logical argument. It suggested that the idea of a completely broke, formerly uneducated guy from Appalachia writing the definitive global philosophy of success was an absolute delusion.
Imposter syndrome kicks in hard.
Exactly. His logical brain made him feel like a fool for even trying. He writes that he actually laughed scornfully at his own ambition.
So the logical brain isn't always the voice of truth. Very often, it is merely a sophisticated defense mechanism designed to prevent you from taking the massive social or financial risks required for real growth.
It's trying to keep you small so you stay safe.
It acts like a corrupted operating system that keeps rebooting the same flawed code every time you try to install a new program.
That is an excellent way to conceptualize it. The human neurology actively resists profound identity-level change. Think of the neurological pathways of a chronic smoker who finally manages to quit.
Okay.
For a month, they endure the withdrawals, they feel incredible, their lung capacity returns, they have achieved the breakthrough.
They're doing great.
And then they encounter a highly stressful day at work. Their logical brain, seeking the familiar chemical homeostasis of nicotine, bypasses their grand breakthrough with a very quiet, very reasonable-sounding lie.
Just one won't hurt.
Exactly. It whispers, "You've already proven your willpower. You are in control now. Just one cigarette to take the edge off won't restart the addiction." And the moment they accept that logical compromise, they instantly relapse into the old physiological trap.
Wow.
Hill's business college was his cigarette. It was the familiar, comfortable hustle that distracted him from his terrifying true purpose.
The application of this concept is critical for anyone trying to pivot their life. When you finally make the hard decision to commit to your true, terrifying purpose, whether that's starting the company, writing the book, or changing careers entirely, you cannot expect the waters to part for you.
There will be resistance.
You must anticipate massive, coordinated internal resistance. Your own highly intelligent, logical mind will manufacture brilliant arguments for why you are a fool. It will highlight every statistical probability of your failure.
It'll use facts against you.
Yes. Your task is to recognize that specific flavor of doubt, not as the truth, but simply as the old self desperately fighting to maintain its grip on your identity. And you have to execute the plan regardless of the internal screaming.
And we are about to see the catastrophic cost of ignoring that internal screaming.
It gets so much worse.
because he allowed his logical doubt to pull him back into the comfortable routine of drifting and lecturing. Rather than fully dedicating his energy to publishing the philosophy, he inadvertently set the stage for an emergency far more severe than an empty bank account in Columbus.
This next phase is where the stakes elevate from career confusion to literal, visceral life or death survival. We are entering the sequence he calls the crucible of fear, focusing on what became known as the Canton tragedy.
The timeline moves forward to 1926. Hill is on his lecture circuit speaking in Canton, Ohio, and sitting in the audience of one of his lectures is a man named Don R. Mellett.
Millet.
Mellett is not a typical attendee. He is the highly influential publisher of the Canton Daily News. Mellett listens to Hill's philosophy and is profoundly struck by its power.
He sees the vision.
He invites Hill for a private meeting, they connect intellectually, and they form a formal partnership. Mellett, wielding significant capital and influence, agrees to resign from his position at the newspaper the following January to take full operational charge of publishing and distributing Hill's success philosophy to the world.
On the surface, this looks like the ultimate stroke of serendipity. After 18 years of struggling and drifting, he has finally secured the perfect, powerful partner to bring his 20-year Carnegie mission to the finish line.
It looks like the perfect happily ever after.
But there is a massive, incredibly dangerous variable in play. Mellett wasn't just a businessman. He was a fierce, crusading journalist. He had been using the front page of the Canton Daily News to wage a relentless, aggressive war against a deeply entrenched syndicate of organized crime, bootleggers, and a highly corrupt local police force that was protecting the mob.
Mellett was directly attacking the financial arteries of the 1920s Prohibition underworld.
He was poking a very dangerous bear.
And in July of 1926, the underworld retaliated with absolute brutality. Don Mellett was assassinated.
Just gunned down.
Gunned down outside his own home by a syndicate hitman operating in collusion with a corrupt Kent police officer. It was a brazen, horrific act that became one of the most highly publicized and shocking crimes of the entire Prohibition era.
The psychological whiplash for our author is unimaginable. He goes to sleep thinking he is months away from global success with his new partner. The morning after the murder, the phone rings. He answers, and an anonymous voice delivers a chillingly calm ultimatum.
Terrifying.
The caller informs him that he has exactly 1 hour to get out of Canton city limits. He can leave voluntarily in his car, or if he is still there in 61 minutes, he will leave in a pine box.
A death threat.
Yeah. The criminal syndicate, seeing Hill constantly meeting with Mellett, had mistakenly assumed that Hill was actively involved in investigating and writing the newspaper exposés.
Confronted with the immediate, credible threat of assassination, all of his philosophical theories about courage just evaporate.
He doesn't stick around to fight.
He does not hesitate. He gets into his automobile and drives frantically out of the state, fleeing into the remote mountains of West Virginia, where he seeks refuge in the home of relatives. And this physical retreat marks the beginning of a profound psychological descent.
The language he uses to describe his existence in West Virginia is incredibly vivid and deeply disturbing. He essentially becomes a prisoner in a basement.
A literal basement.
He refuses to leave the house during daylight hours. When he is forced to step outside at night, he walks with his hand rigidly wrapped around the grip of an automatic pistol in his coat pocket, the safety disengaged, terrified of every single shadow.
Just consumed by paranoia.
If an unfamiliar automobile parks anywhere near the house, he creeps down into the dark basement and watches them through the tiny foundation windows, sweating and waiting for a hit squad to breach the door.
It's a complete collapse.
He went from standing on stages, confidently teaching thousands of people how to be the masters of their own destiny, to being trapped in a self-generating morass of terror. If we want to understand the mechanics of this, it is exactly like stepping into a pit of quicksand.
That's a good way to put it.
The initial terror is bad enough, but every frantic, uncoordinated struggle to rationalize the fear only serves to pull the mind deeper into the darkness.
He diagnoses this specific psychological state as a living death. His central nervous system was utterly fried. His courage evaporated entirely.
And his ambition, right.
The most devastating casualty was his ambition. The relentless burning drive that had sustained him through nearly 2 decades of unpaid research simply vanished. He collapsed into a state of total lethargy. This was the exact severe emergency Carnegie had hypothesized about 20 years prior.
I want to dig into the underlying mechanics of that collapse because it seems disproportionate.
Really? How so?
I mean, I completely understand the physiological response to a death threat. The adrenaline, the paranoia, the need to hide. But why did the external threat of violence systematically dismantle his internal ambition? Why did his entire mind paralyze so completely?
Well, the primary mechanism is that acute, sustained fear biologically paralyzes the higher reasoning faculties of the brain.
Okay, the biology of it.
When the amygdala is constantly firing, the prefrontal cortex, the area responsible for long-term planning, ambition, and logical philosophy, shuts down to conserve energy for basic survival.
Fight or flight.
Right. But there was a secondary, far more toxic psychological layer to this specific breakdown. He wasn't just suffering from the raw fear of a mob hitman. He was being crushed by the profound, humiliating shame of his own fear.
Oh, no, the shame.
He sat in that basement and realized the horrifying hypocrisy of his situation. He had spent his entire adult life traveling the country, accepting money to lecture people on how to summon the other self and conquer any obstacle, and yet here he was, cowering in a basement, terrified of a passing car.
He looked in the mirror and realized he was a fraud. The self-contempt must have been agonizing.
Precisely. And it is that double-layered paralysis, the external fear of the syndicate compounded by the internal agonizing shame of failing to live up to its own grand philosophy, that completely shattered his psyche.
It's the shame that keeps you down.
And we know it was the shame that was the true anchor, because even after the actual assassins and the corrupt police officers were apprehended, tried, and sentenced to life in prison, removing the physical threat entirely, he still could not leave the basement.
Wait, the threat was gone?
Yes. It was physically safe to emerge, but the fear had mutated into a permanent psychological state. He describes becoming deeply grouchy, highly irritable with the relatives who were sheltering him, and entirely indifferent to whether he lived or died.
The application of this dynamic is one of the most crucial elements for anyone trying to navigate a crisis. When we experience a massive, devastating blow, perhaps a highly public failure, a sudden bankruptcy, or a catastrophic error in judgment, the initial event is undeniably painful.
Of course it is.
But the actual trap, the quicksand that pulls you under, is almost always the secondary infection of shame.
The shame is the real killer.
Exactly. The initial failure hurts, but the shame of being exposed, the fear that people realize you aren't as smart or as resilient as you projected, is what keeps you locked in the metaphorical basement of your own mind. You become terrified of trying again, not because you fear the work, but because you fear validating the shame.
And the most dangerous characteristic of that fear-shame spiral is that it is highly contagious and entirely self-generating.
It feeds on itself.
When you observe yourself slipping into that state of lethargic indifference, when you find yourself becoming irrationally angry with the people who are trying to support you, you must understand the mechanical failure happening in your brain. Your reasoning faculty is offline.
You have to interrupt it.
You have to actively intervene and break the cycle before the temporary state becomes a permanent identity trait. You have to recognize that the shame is a secondary synthetic emotion, and it is vastly more destructive than the original failure ever was.
So the vital question becomes, how do you execute that intervention? How do you pull yourself out of the quicksand when it is already up to your neck?
This brings us to the climax of the chapter.
The psychological showdown. It's the fall of 1927. He has been existing in this suffocating state of fear, shame, and lethargy for over a year. But one night, something shifts. He finally forces himself to leave the safety of the house and walks up to a dark, empty public school building situated on a high hill.
He reaches a threshold of exhaustion with his own misery. He decides he is going to physically and mentally fight it out with himself on that hill.
He paces around the school, right?
Yes, he begins pacing around the perimeter of that dark schoolhouse. He paces around it hundreds of times in the dark, engaging in a relentless, repetitive mental assault against his own fear. He just keeps repeating a singular mantra. There is a way out, and I am going to find it before I go back to the house.
He repeats it over and over, demanding an answer from his own dormant neurology. And then it happens. He describes it like a sudden flash of lightning illuminating a dark room.
The breakthrough.
A massive, paradigm-shifting idea bursts into his conscious mind. This is your testing time.
This is your testing time.
He suddenly recontextualizes the entire nightmare. He realizes that the grueling poverty, the humiliating indecision in Columbus, the absolute terror of the Canton mob hit None of it was a punishment.
It was a test.
It was a highly specific, escalating sequence of environmental stressors designed by his own psychology to force him to finally strip away his ego and discover his other self. He looks up, sees the full moon rising over the horizon, and a profound sense of authority washes over him. He realizes he is finally equipped to write the philosophy because he is about to empirically prove it by rising out of his own ashes.
The moment he accepts that reframe, the biological lethargy shatters. His reasoning faculty comes back online.
It's like waking up.
The shift is so intense and physical that he actually stops pacing, snaps to attention, and delivers a military salute in the dark. And in that precise moment, his other self, that immense, dormant power Carnegie had promised he would find 20 years ago, finally assumes total command of his faculties. It bypasses his fearful logical brain and issues a direct, snappy order, phrased exactly like a military commander speaking to a subordinate.
What's the order?
Tomorrow, get into your automobile and drive to Philadelphia, where you will receive aid in publishing your philosophy of achievement.
But this is where the narrative takes a turn that deeply challenges my logical brain. He receives this grand command to go to Philadelphia, but we have to look at the practical reality of his situation. He's been hiding in a basement for a year. He has almost no capital left.
He's practically broke.
And his other self issues a secondary, highly specific set of instructions. It tells him to go to his brother-in-law, borrow $50 to fund the gas for the drive to Philly, and upon arriving in the city, he is ordered to immediately check into the most exclusive, absurdly expensive luxury hotel suite he can find.
The best suite in town.
When I read that, it sounds completely unhinged. He is broke, and his inner voice is telling him to blow his last borrowed $50 on a lavish hotel room. That sounds like financial recklessness bordering on delusion, not a brilliantly strategic business move. What is the actual mechanical logic behind that command?
To the analytical, survival-oriented brain, it sounds like absolute madness, which is precisely why it was the necessary maneuver.
Explain that to me.
The text provides a deep dive into a revelation he experiences regarding the architecture of the mind. He identifies two distinct entities that constantly battle for occupancy: the entity of fear and the entity of faith.
Fear and faith.
For over 12 agonizing months, the fear entity had maintained total dictatorial control over his neurology. His entire baseline reality was dominated by a poverty consciousness, a scarcity mindset, and visceral terror.
So the command to check into the luxury hotel wasn't about indulging in superficial vanity. It was a highly calculated tactical strike designed to assassinate the fear entity by changing the environmental input.
Exactly the mechanism. The faith entity, the other, self-ordered the luxury suite, specifically to forcibly dethrone the fear entity.
He had to shock the system.
He notes that he only had a little over $40 left in his pocket when he arrived in Philadelphia. Booking that specific suite would entirely consume his remaining capital in less than 48 hours.
The massive risk.
It was a point of no return risk. But it functioned as a massive environmental shock to his nervous system. It forcibly ripped his mind away from all thoughts of limitation and poverty. When he walked into that lobby and the bellboy bowed to him, treating him with the deference afforded to a wealthy, successful man, it instantly altered his internal frequency.
It snapped him back into his power.
The luxury environment began weaning his mind off the deep inferiority complex he had cultivated while hiding in the basement.
That concept maps perfectly onto an incredibly illuminating anecdote provided in the annotations by Don Green, the CEO of the Napoleon Hill Foundation.
Oh, I love this story.
Green recounts how, when he was a young man just starting out trying to build his career in banking, he made a very specific, deliberate choice about his environment. He bought his good business suits from a high-end, custom clothing store, the exact same store where the elite executives of Eastman Kodak bought their clothes.
The big shots.
Now, Green couldn't necessarily afford to shop there casually. It was a stretch for his budget. But the owner of the store imparted a vital psychological principle to him. He told Green, "If you want to be a success, you must first dress the part."
Dress the part.
Green wasn't just buying wool and buttons. He was buying proximity to an environment of success. He was putting himself in the literal uniform of the men he wanted to become, knowing that the physical environment would inevitably change his internal psychological frequency.
Of course, when discussing this concept, we must advise a degree of moderation.
Right, don't go bankrupt.
The takeaway here is not an endorsement to go empty your savings account on a penthouse suite or a designer wardrobe tonight in the hopes that it magically manifests wealth. The crucial takeaway is understanding the underlying psychological principle. Your external physical environment heavily dictates your internal emotional state.
You are a vessel occupied by two conflicting entities, fear and faith. And the absolute rule of this framework is that they cannot coexist in power simultaneously.
They cannot.
If you want the entity of faith to guide your actions, you have to ruthlessly curate your environment and tightly close your mind against all limiting, poverty-centric inputs. And the author makes a highly critical distinction here that we cannot overlook. He clearly states that faith does not perform magic tricks.
It's not a genie.
It does not do the actual physical work for you. Sitting in that luxury hotel room did not magically cause a publisher's contract to materialize on the desk out of thin air.
No, it didn't.
What the entity of faith does is clear the static of fear, allowing your reasoning faculty to guide you logically and decisively toward your definite purpose. It commanded him to drive to Philly. It placed him in an environment that restored his confidence. And because his mind was finally clear of panic, his own memory was able to recall a man named Albert Pelton, an old advertiser he knew from his magazine days, who lived in the area and ultimately ended up funding the publication of his books.
The connections finally work.
The magic was just applied logic, executed without the interference of fear.
When we pull all of these narrative threads together and look at the macro picture, the fundamental soul of this chapter is the revelation that your greatest, most profound triumphs are inextricably, mechanically linked to your darkest, most humiliating moments.
They are completely intertwined.
Success is not a clean, linear, upward trajectory on a corporate graph. It is an incredibly messy, agonizing process of systematically burning away the old, fearful self in the intense fires of adversity.
You have to be tested.
We realized that Andrew Carnegie's 20-year challenge wasn't actually about researching the habits of other people. The research was just the vehicle. It was a 20-year crucible, carefully designed to force the author to repeatedly fail, break down, and ultimately conquer his own mind.
And that is the ultimate, undeniable truth of this text. Whether you find yourself pacing around a dark, abandoned schoolhouse in West Virginia trying to reclaim your courage, or staring down a bank account that has hit absolute zero, the mechanical realization is exactly the same. The other self, that internal entity of absolute faith, profound clarity, and zero limitations, is already inside you.
It's been there the whole time.
It has always been there. It is simply dormant, waiting for the precise moment when you finally exhaust your excuses, stop drifting through the comfortable illusions of your life, and aggressively demand a way out of the dark.
And the final, critical piece of that equation is that once you demand that way out, and the other self provides the directive, you must possess the absolute courage to execute those instructions, especially when they completely defy the fearful, scarcity-driven logic of your current circumstances.
So imagine you are at that point. You've endured the crucible, you've discovered your unstoppable other self, you've battled your way out of the paralyzing quicksand of fear and shame, and you've boldly checked into a luxury hotel with your last $50 to reset your frequency. And feels like the ultimate victory.
It does.
But what if I told you there is an incredibly dark, invisible, pervasive force that has been quietly watching your every single move this entire time?
Always watching.
A force that was actively designing those failures and is now preparing to sit down and confess exactly how it flawlessly controls the minds of 98% of the human population. But we'll save that terrifying, paradigm-shattering confession for you to explore in our next deep dive into the text. Until then, take a hard look at your own failures and keep digging. You might just be 3 feet from gold.
What if the greatest financial or personal disaster of your life wasn't actually a punishment?
That is a pretty heavy question to start with.
Right. But what if it was a highly orchestrated test? Like a test specifically designed to introduce you to a hidden, totally unstoppable version of yourself?
I mean, it completely flips the script on how we view adversity. We spend, so much of our time and energy trying to just insulate ourselves from any kind of failure.
Oh, absolutely. We build these padded walls around our careers, our bank accounts. We just want to feel safe.
Yeah, but to suggest that the disaster itself, the very thing we are running away from, is the actual key to unlocking our ultimate potential. That demands that we look at our worst moments as initiations, not as tragedies.
It really does. And that completely flipped script is exactly what we are going to explore today.
I am so ready for this one.
Welcome to today's deep dive. We are looking really closely at Chapter 2 of Napoleon Hill's manuscript, Outwitting the Devil. This specific chapter is titled, A New World is Revealed to Me.
And it is a fascinating world, to say the least.
It really is. And for you listening right now, whether you're an entrepreneur trying to navigate a wildly unpredictable market or, a professional facing what feels like a massive career roadblock, this is for you.
Or even just someone trying to make sense of a major personal setback.
Exactly. You are about to learn how to distinguish between a temporary defeat and a permanent failure. And we're going to unpack why discovering what Hill calls your other self is the ultimate competitive advantage for navigating uncertain times.
But to really grasp the gravity of this chapter, I think we have to start by understanding the intensely personal context behind it.
Yeah, please set the stage for us, because this wasn't just some abstract theory for Hill, right?
Not at all. He didn't write this from an ivory tower while everything was going great for him. This chapter represents a massive tectonic turning point in his actual life.
Like a total rock bottom moment.
Exactly. We are catching him at a moment where he is transitioning from being completely paralyzed by fear. He's literally hiding out in seclusion in West Virginia.
Wait, like actually hiding?
Yes. He was facing total economic ruin, dealing with intense psychological torment, and just running from his problems. But from that absolute rock bottom, he somehow shifts into a state of absolute clarity and power.
So he moves from being this helpless victim of his circumstances to becoming the master of his fate.
Right. And the mechanics of how he does that, not just the fluffy inspiration, but the actual psychological mechanics, that's what makes this material so incredibly relevant for us today.
Okay, let's really dig into those mechanics then, because the first major concept Hill introduces here is the awakening of this other self and the complete total rejection of fear.
Yeah, he undergoes what he describes as a new birth.
Right. And he makes it very clear that this isn't just a slight shift in perspective. It's not like, reading a motivational quote on Instagram and feeling better for an hour.
No, it's a profound structural separation from all forms of fear, which suddenly grants him this unprecedented courage.
It's basically a complete psychological reset. And he illustrates this with a wild story. So he writes about suddenly having this absolute faith that the $25,000 he desperately needed to publish his 8 volumes of books, which is
Just materialize.
yeah, which, keep in mind, $25,000 back then was a staggering amount of money.
It was a fortune.
But he says he visualized the money already in his possession. He just operated as if it was a done deal. And then 3 months later, a man named Pelton calls on him in Philadelphia.
And just like that, the books get published.
Right. And Hill receives his first royalty check of $850. So Hill concludes from this experience that his other self revealed a core truth to him.
And that truth is, your only limitation is the one which you set up in your own mind.
Okay, so I have to play the skeptic here for a second, because this is where a lot of modern readers, they might roll their eyes a bit.
Please do. It's a very bold claim, and it is so easy to misinterpret.
It just sounds a lot like magical thinking, or, that kind of toxic positivity where you just close your eyes, wish really hard for $1 million, and expect the universe to drop a bag of cash on your doorstep.
Right, like the law of attraction, but stripped of all the actual work.
Exactly. So how does this actually work for someone trying to start a business or lead a team today? Like, if you're listening to this on your commute right now and you just have absolute faith that your startup will get funded.
Is a venture capitalist going to magically knock on your door because you visualized it?
Yeah. If we don't explain the mechanism here, this just sounds like pure fantasy.
You are hitting on the exact friction point that tricks people up with this text. So let's ground this in reality and explain the actual how. What Hill is describing isn't magic at all.
Okay, what is it then?
It is the sudden, complete removal of mental friction. Let's just look at what fear actually does to the human brain.
Biologically speaking.
Biologically, psychologically, yeah. When you are paralyzed by fear, like Hill was, hiding out in West Virginia, broke and terrified, your brain literally narrows its focus to immediate survival.
Oh, I've heard of this. It's called cognitive tunneling, right?
Exactly. Cognitive tunneling. You become completely blind to systemic opportunities, peripheral solutions, or long-term strategies.
Because your mental bandwidth is entirely consumed by the immediate threat. You're just trying not to drown, so you can't even see the life raft floating 10 feet away.
That is the perfect way to put it. Now, let's look at your venture capitalist example. If you pitch a VC while you're operating out of fear, desperation, and self-doubt, what happens?
Well, you hedge your bets. You sound unconvincing.
Right, your body language is defensive, and you are literally communicating risk to them. The VC senses that friction, and they pass.
But what happens if you undergo this new birth? Like, what happens when you tap into this other self that operates without all that fear?
Everything changes. The way you communicate, the risks you're willing to take, it all shifts.
I've always liked to think of this other self less like a magic wand and more like a massive computer operating system upgrade.
Oh, I like that analogy.
Yeah. Like when you upgrade a laptop's OS, the hardware hasn't actually changed. The screen, the keyboard, the processor, it's all the exact same physical machine, right?
The external reality remains identical.
Exactly. The economic depression Hill was in didn't just vanish. But what changes is the software's ability to process data, manage resources, and crucially, process risk.
Right, because if you delete the background application called crippling anxiety that's eating up like 90% of your RAM.
Suddenly, your processor is lightning fast.
That is a phenomenal way to visualize it. The physical circumstances didn't change overnight for Hill, but his internal software underwent a massive upgrade.
So his processing power finally matched the problem he was trying to solve.
Exactly. The other self, as Hill describes it, operates without precedence and recognizes no limitations. So, when he visualized that $25,000, it wasn't that the universe magically spawned a guy named Pelton out of thin air.
Pelton already existed.
Right. Pelton was a real person, navigating the same business world, looking for a lucrative project to fund. Capital is always looking for a place to deploy.
So the absolute faith just allowed Hill to finally see Pelton. Or, act in a way that actually attracted him.
Precisely. By removing his self-imposed limitations, Hill was able to act with the kind of clarity, confidence, and decisiveness that naturally attracts partners and capital.
Which makes sense.
Yeah.
If Hill had pitched Pelton while reeking of the fear he felt a few months prior.
Pelton would have run for the hills. Nobody wants to buy a philosophy of success from a guy who looks terrified of his own shadow.
I mean, I certainly wouldn't.
Right. So the absolute faith Hill talks about is an active, unshakable confidence that dictates how you walk into a room, how you speak about your vision, and how you just relentlessly pursue the next step.
It's the version of you that operates without the handbrake on.
Yes. Which makes that core quote so much more profound. Your only limitation is the one which you set up in your own mind.
He means that the physical world already has enough real, tangible barriers. You don't need to do the devil's work for him by building imaginary walls inside your own head.
And that is exactly how the other self operates. It stops projecting imaginary walls onto the future.
So if you're listening right now, this is where you can immediately apply this. Just think about the biggest professional roadblocks sitting on your desk today.
The one thing standing between you and your next big goal.
Yeah, if you do a harsh, honest audit of that roadblock, ask yourself, how much of it is an actual physical barrier? Like a literal lack of raw materials or a literal law of physics.
And how much of it is simply a limitation you've set up in your own mind?
Exactly. Thoughts like, I'm not experienced enough, or the market is too crowded, or I don't have the right connections.
Those are software glitches. They are not hardware failures.
But that does raise a critical practical question for me. Because once you patch those software glitches, and once this other self is awakened, and you start acting without fear.
What happens when you hit a real wall?
Right. What happens when you inevitably hit an actual physical brick wall? Because operating without fear absolutely does not mean operating without failure.
No, it certainly doesn't. And just because my laptop has a great new operating system doesn't mean I won't ever drop it, or spill coffee on it.
Exactly. And that leads us perfectly into how Hill fundamentally redefines failure in this chapter. He draws this massive, bright line between temporary defeat and permanent failure.
He does, and it is arguably one of the most crucial distinctions in the entire book. If you misunderstand this part, the rest of his philosophy kind of falls apart.
The text states explicitly that the other self may meet with temporary defeat, but never with permanent failure. And the example he uses is pretty intense.
Yeah, he's the 1929 economic depression.
Right, he uses that as his prime example of temporary defeat. Now, he acknowledges that the Depression brought immense misery and starvation to millions of people, but then he says something wildly controversial.
He claims it was actually more of a blessing than a curse.
Which is a crazy thing to say about the Great Depression. But his reasoning is that it taught people that being forced not to work is infinitely worse than being forced to work.
He argues that the systemic collapse ultimately forced people to turn to what he calls the great within for solutions.
The way Hill frames the 1929 Depression is deeply challenging, especially for anyone who has lived through severe economic hardship.
It is, but it is profoundly necessary for this philosophy. He is essentially forcing us to examine our relationship with external systems.
I like to think about this through the lens of playing a really difficult video game, like Elden Ring or Dark Souls.
Oh, those games are brutal.
They are. And if you're playing a punishing game like that and your character dies because you missed a jump or you didn't understand a boss's attack pattern, you don't throw the controller through the TV.
Well, most people don't.
Fair enough. But you don't call the manufacturer and say, my game is permanently broken, it's a failure. No, you just lost a life. You failed the level. That is a temporary defeat.
Because the game is literally designed to teach you through that friction.
Exactly. The only way you achieve permanent failure in that scenario is if you turn off the console and walk away forever.
In a video game, the defeat is just data. It's immediate feedback. You learn that jumping at that exact second gets you killed, so your brain processes the data, and you adjust your timing for the next run.
The friction literally makes you better. But in real life, we don't treat a lost client or a failed product launch as data.
No, because the emotional stakes are so much higher, we confuse the feedback with a final existential judgment. We think the temporary defeat means that we ourselves are a permanent failure.
But why do we do that? Like, why do we actively enjoy the friction in a video game or a challenging sport, but the moment we face friction in our business or our careers, it completely destroys our morale?
That's a great question. I think it's because in the game, you know you have another life. You have the safety of the simulation.
And your ego isn't tied to it.
Exactly. More importantly, your ego isn't fundamentally attached to the digital character. But in reality, we tie our entire identity, our survival, and our ego to our professional outcomes.
Let it hits hard.
So when Hill says the other self never meets with permanent failure, he's explaining that the other self disconnects the ego from the equation. The other self only sees data.
So it looks at bankruptcy not as I am a failure, but as this specific business model didn't work under these conditions.
Exactly. Now let's look at why he called the 1929 depression a blessing. A depression forces a break in what he later calls hypnotic rhythm.
Which essentially means it forces a massive, violent change in mass habits, right?
Yes. When the external systems we rely on, our comfortable corporate jobs, the stock market, the predictable economy, when those completely fail, human beings are forcibly stripped of their complacency.
We are forced to look inward because the outside world has literally stopped providing. We have to become our own saviors.
You can't just be a cog in the machine when the machine itself gets dismantled.
That is such a vivid image. When the factory closes, you are forced to innovate.
And Sharon Lechter, in her modern annotations of this text, really emphasizes this for today's economic climate. She asks a very pointed question.
How did she ask?
She asks, during an economic downturn, will you find the entrepreneurial spirit to create a new business, or will you just sit and watch from the sidelines?
That's a gut check.
Yeah.
And if you look at recent history, economic downturns are historically the exact breeding grounds for the greatest success stories.
Oh, totally. Look at the 2008 financial crisis.
Yes. The world felt like it was ending. The housing market collapsed. Millions of people lost their jobs. It was terrifying.
But in the exact middle of that chaos, you have companies like Airbnb and Uber being founded.
That is the perfect modern equivalent. Why did those companies emerge then of all times?
Because the playing field was leveled. People had less disposable income, which meant old, inefficient, expensive systems like traditional hotels or taxi medallions suddenly had massive vulnerabilities.
The people who relabeled the 2008 crash from a permanent failure of the economy to a temporary defeat of traditional systems were the ones who started looking for the new gaps in the market.
Exactly. If people suddenly need cheap places to stay and other people desperately need to monetize their spare bedrooms just to pay the mortgage, there's your seed for Airbnb.
The depression was a blessing for them because it forced that exact adaptation.
So if you are listening to this, I challenge you to put this into practice right now. Think of a recent setback in your career or your business.
Yeah, maybe it's a client who churned a promotion you were passed over for or a launch that just totally flopped.
I want you to verbally relabel it. Say it out loud. It is not a failure. It is a temporary defeat.
And once you've stripped the finality away with it, ask yourself, what new strategy is this defeat demanding that I create? What is the raw data, the actual feedback, trying to teach me about my approach?
If you can genuinely make that shift, it changes how you walk through the world entirely.
Because if you truly believe that permanent failure is only a choice you make by quitting, you become incredibly dangerous to your competition. You become anti-fragile.
Which is such a liberating, powerful way to live.
It is. But I do want to push back a little here, or at least dig deeper.
Go for it.
Because if every defeat is just temporary feedback, what is the actual hidden value inside these moments of intense crisis? Like, why do we have to go through the excruciating pain of the friction at all?
Right. Why not an easier way?
Yeah. If the universe wants us to learn, why not just send an email? Why the Great Depression?
This is where Hill's philosophy gets truly sophisticated, I think. He moves beyond just simple optimism or resilience and introduces a structural view of how the universe operates.
Right, which brings us to the concept of the seed of equivalent benefit and the law of compensation.
Yes. Hill discovers that there is a solution for every legitimate problem, no matter how difficult it might seem.
And he goes further, stating that every single experience of defeat or adversity carries within it the seed of an equivalent benefit.
He uses his own life in West Virginia as the prime example here.
Right, he was hiding out, essentially paralyzed by fear, reduced to poverty and absolute want. But he says that this specific agonizing suffering brought him knowledge that more than offset the pain.
Directly citing Ralph Waldo Emerson's law of compensation.
Now, I have a couple of big problems with how this is phrased, and I need you to help me untangle it because it can sound a bit problematic.
Let's hear them. Let's break it down.
First, Hill says there is a solution for every legitimate problem. That feels like a massive loophole. What makes a problem legitimate?
The definition of legitimate.
Yeah. Like, if I want to fly by flapping my arms, is that a legitimate problem? If I fail, do I just say it wasn't legitimate?
That's a great point. And your second issue.
Second, if every adversity truly has an equivalent benefit, does that mean we should be out there actively seeking hardship?
Oh, like self-sabotage.
Exactly. Should a CEO purposefully tank their company just to find the magic seed of benefit? Or, what about someone who loses their entire low savings in a market crash through no fault of their own?
Right.
Are you honestly telling me the universe is going to just hand them an equivalent benefit to make up for it?
Those are fantastic pushbacks, and they hit on the exact nuances that people often miss, which leads them to dismiss this entire philosophy outright. So let's tackle legitimate first.
Okay, what makes a problem legitimate?
A legitimate problem, in the context of Hill's work and natural law, is a problem aligned with human potential and the laws of physics.
So my arm-flapping bird idea?
Trying to flap your arms to fly violates the physical laws of aerodynamics. That is an illegitimate problem. You can't solve it because the fundamental premise is flawed.
Okay, that makes sense.
But trying to build a machine that allows humans to fly, that is a legitimate problem. And as the Wright brothers proved, there was a solution. It just required immense temporary defeat to find the data.
Oh, I see. So in business, a legitimate problem is one where value can be created, exchanged, or optimized within the bounds of reality.
Exactly. Figuring out how to scale a remote team, how to enter a saturated market, or how to recover from a massive PR disaster. These are legitimate problems because they operate within the realm of human agency.
Okay, that clears up the loophole. It's about operating within reality, not fantasy. But what about the second part, the tragedy aspect?
Right. If someone loses everything, where is the equivalent benefit?
Yeah, and why shouldn't we seek out disaster if it's so good for us?
Well, first off, you don't need to seek hardship because nature and human error will provide plenty of it on their own. Seeking it is just masochism, not growth.
True. Life is hard enough.
But when it inevitably strikes, your job is to mine it for value. This ties directly into Emerson's essay on compensation, which Hill leans on heavily here.
And Emerson's concept is essentially that the universe is a system of perfect, inescapable balance, right?
Yes. For every action, there is a reaction. For every loss, there is a gain. A person cannot be diminished in one area without being compensated in another, even if that compensation isn't immediately obvious, financial, or material.
So let's address my tough example. Someone losing your life savings in a crash.
Emerson and Hill wouldn't say, "Don't worry, the universe will magically mail you a check for the exact amount you lost."
Right. The universe isn't cutting checks.
No, the compensation isn't always symmetrical in kind. The loss is the financial security. But the equivalent benefit might be the forced stripping away of a complacent life that was actually leading them down a path of quiet desperation.
Wow. Okay, so the benefit is internal.
It could be. It might be the forced development of a radically new skill set to survive, which eventually leads to a much more fulfilling, purpose-driven endeavor that they never would have tried otherwise.
It reminds me of people who get fired from a high-paying corporate job that they secretly hated, but they just felt too comfortable to leave.
Yes, that happens all the time.
The immediate loss is the salary and the status, and it feels like a total disaster in the moment. But the compensation is the sudden, terrifying freedom and the forced motivation to finally start that business they've been dreaming about for a decade.
Precisely. For Hill, the intense suffering and paralyzing fear he experienced in West Virginia was the exact necessary price required to buy the specific knowledge he needed.
The tuition fee, basically.
Exactly. If he hadn't been backed into a corner where his very survival was at stake, he never would have been forced to look inward and discover his other self. The adversity was the harsh tuition he paid for his enlightenment.
But, and I think this is the most critical word in the entire concept, the text specifies that adversity carries the seed of an equivalent benefit.
Ah, right. It's a seed.
It's not a fully grown oak tree just handed to you on a silver platter. It's not a finished product.
Exactly. And this is where the toxic positivity crowd gets it entirely wrong. A seed does absolutely nothing if you just leave it sitting on a concrete floor.
It has to be planted.
It has to be recognized, planted, watered, and nurtured. When a business failure happens, the benefit doesn't just magically appear in your bank account the next day.
Right. You don't just wake up and say, wow, glad I failed. Look at all this benefit.
No, the seed is usually a brutal piece of harsh feedback, a forced change in your daily habits, or a radically new perspective on your industry. It requires the individual to actively nurture that seed through changed thought habits.
Because if you just wallow in the defeat, complain about the economy, and play the victim, the seed dies on the concrete.
You have to actively hunt for it and cultivate it.
That is such a powerful reframe for the listener. Your practical takeaway here is a fundamental mindset shift. Starting today, stop looking at your current problems as personal attacks from the universe.
Or as evidence that you aren't good enough.
Exactly. Look at them as highly complex puzzles that contain a hidden seed of equal or greater value. Your job isn't to be a victim of the problem. Your job is to find the seed.
I love that.
If your supply chain suddenly breaks down, it's a nightmare, yes. But the seed might be the opportunity to completely vertically integrate your business and cut out middlemen forever.
Or if you lose a major client, the seed might be the sudden bandwidth to pivot to a much more profitable, scalable demographic. The universe provided the friction. Now you have to find the seed. And this naturally brings us to a massive question, because finding that seed and solving those legitimate problems is incredibly difficult.
It really is.
And as we all know, when you are deep in the trenches of adversity, human logic and our standard five senses aren't always enough to spot the seed.
Right. Because when you are stressed, broke, or failing, your logical conscious brain is usually too exhausted to see the big picture.
Which is exactly why Hill realizes he needs to tap into a much larger network of information.
And that brings us to the final and perhaps most fascinating concept in the chapter, tapping into infinite intelligence and the sixth sense.
This is where things get really expansive.
Yeah. Hill states that this other self he discovered is really just a newly opened access point to what he calls infinite intelligence.
And he says he accessed this state by mixing faith with thought.
Which he equates to having a greater faith in the power of prayer or, intensely focused intention. And when he reaches this specific state of mind, it opens up a sixth sense.
He describes it very poetically.
He does. He says it's like a guardian angel that opens the door to the temple of wisdom.
Now, it sounds highly mystical, and for a lot of strictly analytical thinkers, this is where they might want to check out.
I know, I almost did the first time I read it.
But Hill works very hard to ground this concept in observable, natural reality.
He really does. He points to nature as the ultimate, undeniable proof of this infinite intelligence. He says this intelligence is the invisible force that perfectly converts a tiny acorn into a massive oak tree.
It's the law that makes water invariably flow downhill in response to gravity.
Right. It perfectly balances the stars, the sun, and the incredibly complex ecosystems of the Earth. He's arguing that there is a systemic underlying intelligence to the universe, like an operating code.
And that human beings have the unique ability to consciously tap into it.
Let me try a modern tech analogy here, because I think it helps demystify the somewhat mystical language he uses.
Let's hear it.
Imagine your everyday logical conscious brain, the one you use to do math or write emails, is a standalone laptop. It's got a decent processor, but it has very limited hard drive space.
Okay, I'm with you.
It only knows what you have directly downloaded onto it through your 5 physical senses.
Mhm.
Your past experiences, the books you've read, the immediate data right in front of you.
So it's a completely closed system.
Exactly. It's a closed, limited system. If the answer to your problem isn't already on the hard drive, you're stuck.
You just get an error message.
Right. The other self, then, acts like the laptop's Wi-Fi card suddenly activating. It's the connection that links your standalone laptop to the infinite intelligence cloud.
Oh, that is brilliant.
Suddenly, you aren't just relying on your local hard drive's limited data. You have access to limitless data, global pattern recognition, and infinite processing power that exists completely outside of your immediate physical experience.
That's a phenomenal way to visualize it. Because infinite intelligence, as Hill describes it, isn't some guy with a white beard sitting on a cloud pulling levers.
Definitely not.
It is the underlying operating system of the entire universe. Let's look really closely at Hill's observations of nature because they are crucial to understanding how this works for humans mechanistically.
Okay, break that down for us.
Nature seamlessly forces adaptation. If a species of tree is growing in a dense tropical rainforest, infinite intelligence dictates that it grows incredibly broad leaves to capture the little sunlight that makes it through the thick canopy.
Makes sense.
But if you take a similar species and it grows in the Arctic, it adapts with needles to survive the harsh winters and retain moisture. Nature doesn't sit around complaining about the climate.
Doesn't judge the friction, it just solves the problem.
Yes. It uses the adversity of the climate to force a perfectly balanced, elegant adaptation. And similarly, infinite intelligence uses adversity to force human adaptation.
So the economic depression, the personal failures, the business collapses, these are just the winter storms forcing us to adapt.
Exactly. But here is the critical part. Accessing this cloud of intelligence, turning on that Wi-Fi card, isn't about blind luck.
And it isn't about waiting passively for a lightning bolt of inspiration to hit you.
No. As Hill points out, it is a deliberate, engineered state of mind.
Right, he said he accessed it by mixing faith with thought. But how does a person actually do that on a Tuesday afternoon? Like if I'm stressed about making payroll, how do I mix faith with thought?
It ultimately comes down to the complete absence of doubt. Doubt is the ultimate bandwidth throttler.
Ooh, bandwidth throttler. I like that.
If you are trying to connect to a massive, complex database in the cloud, but you are simultaneously running a heavy, resource-draining, malware-like program called fear and anxiety on your local machine, the connection will time out.
It will just fail. You get a little spinning wheel of death.
Exactly. You won't be able to download the intuition, the sixth sense insights, or the creative solutions. Mixing faith with thought means intensely focusing your conscious thought on the desired outcome, the solution.
While simultaneously enforcing a state of absolute, unwavering faith that the solution exists and is accessible to you.
It's essentially entering a state of flow where the ego and its fears are completely silenced.
So, to get practical, Hill advises us to take an inventory of our intangible assets to help silence that fear, because fear usually comes from the threat of losing our material things.
Exactly. When your identity is tied entirely to your bank account, losing money feels like dying. The fear takes over and the Wi-Fi disconnects.
So Hill explicitly advises us to take inventory of the things we possess that cannot be touched by a market crash, a bank failure, or a competitor.
Right. He specifically mentions things like peace of mind and happiness as these vital intangible assets.
And those assets are accessed and maintained through this connection to infinite intelligence.
When you realize that your true wealth is your ability to connect to an infinite source of solutions, the loss of material wealth becomes nothing more than a temporary inconvenience.
It's not an existential threat anymore.
No. You have the software required to rebuild it all and probably build it better than before because you now have the data from the temporary defeat.
Which gives us a brilliant, actionable, practical takeaway for today. If you are listening to this, I want you to take just 5 minutes today to do exactly what Hill suggests.
Perform an intangible asset inventory.
Yes. Get a physical piece of paper and write down the assets you possess that absolutely cannot be touched by a market crash, a bad quarter, or a vindictive boss.
Ask yourself, how much peace of mind can you summon on demand? What highly specialized knowledge or unique skills do you hold?
How adaptable have you proven yourself to be in the past? What is the strength and depth of your personal network?
When you begin to measure your true wealth by your connection to these intangibles, your capacity to handle risk just explodes.
You aren't just your bank balance. You are the operating system.
If we pull back and connect all of this to the bigger picture, it really is a complete, radical paradigm shift in how we understand success and resilience.
It really is. So let's tie all of these threads together in our synthesis, because we've covered a massive amount of ground here today.
We definitely have.
We started with the awakening of the other self, that upgraded operating system that processes data without the friction of fear.
From there, we redefined failure, learning to view every setback as merely a temporary defeat, just a piece of data in the video game of business.
Then we learned that we have to actively hunt for and nurture the seed of equivalent benefit hidden inside every adversity.
And finally, we discussed how to plug our limited local minds into the limitless cloud of infinite intelligence to find the solutions to our legitimate problems.
When you weave all four of these ideas together, you arrive at the true soul, the absolute core message of this chapter.
And that message is that true freedom and entrepreneurial success do not come from successfully insulating yourself against hardship.
We spend so much money, time, and emotional energy trying to build safe, padded rooms for ourselves.
But this chapter argues convincingly that adversity isn't the enemy. Adversity is the exact necessary friction required to awaken your other self.
It's the grindstone that sharpens the blade. Without the grindstone, you just have a dull piece of metal.
Exactly. Without the intense friction, the other self stays dormant forever. The adversity forces you to realize that all failure is temporary.
It acts as the necessary catalyst, pushing you out of your limited, terrified, logical brain and forcing you to connect with the infinite intelligence that holds the solution to every legitimate problem.
You don't outwit the devil by hiding from him in a safe room. You outwit him by letting his attacks force you into a higher, untouchable state of consciousness.
That is incredibly powerful. The attacks are the literal catalyst for your own evolution.
That's a beautiful way to look at it.
But as Napoleon Hill sits there at the Lincoln Memorial, finally armed with the power of his other self, feeling this profound connection to infinite intelligence, a chilling realization sets in.
Oh, this is the turning point.
He looks back at all those years he spent, paralyzed with indecision, hiding in West Virginia, terrified of his own shadow, convinced he was a permanent failure.
And he realizes that while he was frozen in fear, a very real, insidious force had been dancing a jig of rejoicing.
He had been a puppet, and he hadn't even seen the strings until this exact moment. Next time, we'll find out exactly what happens when Hill stops running, turns around, and brings this devil out of the shadows for a face-to-face interrogation.
It is going to be a fascinating, highly revealing conversation. The gloves are really coming off.
So to leave you with one final thought, going back to where we started this deep dive, if the disaster or the roadblock you are facing right now is actually a highly orchestrated test, if it's a test, what is the specific lesson it is waiting for you to learn? Find the seed. We'll see you on the next deep dive. What if the greatest obstacle to your success wasn't the economy or your boss or even, a lack of skills?
Yeah. What if it's literally an entity that is actively squatting in the unused space of your own brain?
Right. Today we are taking a really deep dive into Napoleon Hill's incredibly controversial interview with the devil.
Which is a manuscript that was actually hidden away for, over 70 years?
Yeah, exactly. 70 years. And we're going to learn how mental laziness, or what the text calls drifting, secretly sabotages our goals.
And why independent thought is just, it's the ultimate weapon for personal and financial freedom.
So for anyone who's interested in business, entrepreneurship, or just taking control of their life, understanding these hidden traps is the master key to outmaneuvering your own worst instincts.
It really is. And the mission of this deep dive is to basically extract the practical life and business strategies hidden inside this really strange allegorical interrogation.
Because whether you view this devil as a literal demonic entity or just a brilliant psychological metaphor for self-sabotage, the mechanisms of failure described here are stunningly accurate.
Absolutely. The premise alone sets up this fascinating dynamic right out of the gate.
Yeah, Hill, who goes by the pseudonym Mr. Earthbound in the text, he basically forces this interview, right?
He does. He demands that the devil answer him truthfully, and the devil, in turn, demands to be called Your Majesty.
Which is so arrogant, but he justifies it by claiming he controls like 98% of the people in the world.
Right. That 98% figure is structurally vital to everything we're going to unpack today.
Because he's setting up this statistical argument that cognitive passivity is the norm.
Exactly. If 98% of the population is under this influence, it means failure, or at least failing to reach your potential, is the default human condition.
Success is the anomaly. It takes effort. But when Hill presses this entity to describe its physical form, the answer is just completely wild.
Yeah, it radically redefines the entire concept of what a devil even is.
Right, because it's not a guy in a red suit with a pitchfork.
No, not at all. The devil reveals he actually has no physical body. He's just a negative energy, a negative principle.
I think the exact quote is something like, "I merely move in and occupy the unused space of the human brain."
Yes, I sow the seeds of negative thought. It's this profound psychological setup.
It really is. By defining the devil as negative energy occupying unused space, Hill is arguing that a passive mind is inherently vulnerable.
Nature abhors a vacuum. If you aren't actively directing your thoughts, negativity is just going to automatically fill that void.
Here's where it gets really interesting for me, and I like to think of this as a commercial real estate analogy.
Oh, I love this analogy. Go ahead.
So think of your mind like a massive, empty, commercial high-rise building. You're the landlord, right?
Right, and you have to manage it.
Exactly. If you don't put a paying tenant in there, like a clear goal or a focused project, that floor doesn't just stay empty and pristine.
No, squatters are going to move in.
Yes. Squatters move in, they bring in trash, they strip the copper wiring, they literally start a fire in the lobby for warmth, and they wreck the place.
And the devil in this text is the ultimate squatter.
He really is. He's looking for any vacant cognitive real estate you have.
And the nuance there is that the squatter doesn't just want passive shelter, they are actively altering the environment so the landlord never returns.
Wow, yeah. They want the building to collapse.
Exactly. So for you listening, you really have to actively manage your mental real estate.
Any area of your life where you aren't intentionally setting a goal, well, that's an area vulnerable to external control.
Right. And to keep that mind unoccupied, this negative force uses a very specific set of tools to paralyze the owner.
Which brings us to the ultimate paralyzer, the master weapon in the squatter's arsenal.
Fear. The devil confesses that his absolute cleverest device for mind control is fear.
He outlines 6 specific fears, doesn't he?
Yeah, the 6 most effective fears are poverty, criticism, ill health, loss of love, old age, and death.
But the text zeroes in on 2 of them as the most powerful, like the front and back gates of control.
Exactly. Poverty and death.
So let's talk about poverty, because for anyone in business, this feels counterintuitive.
It does. You'd think the fear of being broke would be a massive motivator.
Right. Like, oh man, I'm scared of poverty, so I'm going to wake up at 5 a.m., get a job, and grind. Isn't that a good thing?
Well, no, because the fear of poverty discourages creative thinking.
It forces you into a scarcity mindset, right?
Exactly. When you are terrified of poverty, you make incredibly conservative, reactive decisions.
You stop taking entrepreneurial risks.
Right. It makes you a wage slave to circumstance rather than a creator of wealth. You just try to survive instead of building something.
It limits you to what the text calls temporary defeat. It's like you're playing defense 100% of the time.
And the text emphasizes that these fears are planted so deftly that people actually believe they are their own organic thoughts.
Wow, that is so insidious. They disguise their self-sabotage as, like, simple pragmatism.
I'm just being realistic about the economy, they'll say. Or, I'm just playing it safe.
But really, it's the squatter talking. So if you're listening right now, you need to audit your recent career or business decisions.
Ask yourself, were they made out of a drive to achieve a goal or out of a fear of poverty?
Or fear of criticism, because that's the other huge one that kills innovation in the boardroom.
Oh, absolutely. The fear of criticism prevents you from taking social or creative risks.
You get a brilliant idea for a new product, but you don't pitch it because you're terrified your boss will mock you.
It's biological, really. Early humans feared tribal rejection because it meant exile, which meant death.
So the squatter hijacks that ancient survival mechanism for modern low-stakes scenarios?
Exactly. And once fear completely paralyzes the mind, this specific behavioral pattern takes over.
Right, the devil's absolute masterpiece.
The core trap of drifting.
Drifting. This is such a fascinating concept, because it's not just being lazy on the couch, is it?
No, a drifter is defined very specifically as someone who does little or no thinking for themselves.
They just permit themselves to be influenced by outside circumstances.
They accept whatever life throws their way without putting up a fight. They are mentally lazy.
I mean, they have opinions, but those opinions are just supplied by the devil or, society.
Right. The non-drifter is the exact opposite. They have a definite goal, a well-organized plan, and they use their own mind.
The contrast Hill draws here is incredibly stark.
It is. He says the difference between the wealthy few and the poor majority isn't talent or luck.
He calls poverty a contagious disease found exclusively among drifters, right?
Yes. The non-drifter actually forces life to yield what they want. They dictate the terms.
Okay, let's unpack this with an analogy. A drifter is basically like a person sitting in a cheap raft on a fast river.
With no oars.
Exactly, no oars. Just letting the current smash them into the rocks, and then they sit there complaining about how unfair the river is.
While the non-drifter has a speedboat, a GPS, and both hands gripping the steering wheel.
The non-drifter still has to navigate the exact same river. They still face the rocks and the currents.
But the crucial distinction is agency. The non-drifter uses their energy to dictate their trajectory.
While the drifter spends all their energy just absorbing the impact of the environment.
And we shouldn't confuse drifting with a lack of effort. Drifters actually work incredibly hard.
Oh, yeah. They expend massive amounts of emotional energy building these intricate, multi-layered excuses for why they can't succeed.
It's the illusion of action. They mistake complaining for actual purpose.
So I have to challenge the listener here. Where are you drifting?
Are you staying in a job you hate just because it's easier than doing the cognitive work of planning an exit?
Because drifting is comfortable in the short term, but it is absolutely lethal in the long term.
But nobody just wakes up and chooses to ruin their life. No 10-year-old says, I want to be a drifter when I grow up.
Right. So how does this drifting even start? The devil explains exactly how he beats the trap.
He gains control really early. He uses physical heredity and environment, but his main weapons are bribes.
He basically bribes people into drifting using their natural desires.
Food, sex, greed, vanity, and, this is a big one, the desire to express loosely organized opinions.
Man, that last one feels so prophetic when you look at social media today.
Doesn't it? We are literally incentivized to express unresearched emotional opinions instantly.
It's like the industrialization of drifting. But then the text makes this incredibly controversial point about where this all starts.
Yes, this is the part that probably got the manuscript locked in a vault.
The devil claims his greatest allies are parents, school teachers, and religious instructors.
He says he uses them to destroy independent thought in children by demanding absolute conformity.
Okay, we need to look at this impartially. We're not taking sides here, left or right, and we aren't bashing institutions.
No, not at all. The text is making a profound psychological argument about institutional conformity, not the institutions themselves.
Right. Hill is asserting that any institution that tells a child what to think rather than how to think is inadvertently setting them up to be drifters.
Because institutions require standardization to function, a public school system needs compliant students to maintain order.
But the traits that make a kid a good student, compliance, memorization, waiting for instructions, are the exact opposite of an entrepreneur.
Exactly. The text doesn't condemn the teachers. It condemns the dogmatic methods that crush independent inquiry.
So what does this actually mean in practice? It's basically like teaching a kid to paint by numbers versus teaching them color theory.
Oh, that's a perfect way to put it.
Paint by numbers guarantees conformity. The teacher gets 30 acceptable pictures from 30 kids.
But it completely destroys the child's capacity to create original art.
They learn that success just means staying inside the lines someone else drew for them.
And if they color outside the lines, they're punished with a bad grade or social isolation.
So they surrender their minds to the authority figure. They learn to be reactive.
Which is why you need to look at your own beliefs about money and success right now.
Did you arrive at your business strategies through independent thought, or were they just handed to you by your environment?
Once a person is bribed into this passive state of drifting, they get locked into a pattern.
And the text calls this pattern hypnotic rhythm, right?
Yes. Hypnotic rhythm is the universal law of nature that makes habits permanent. It's like a whirlpool.
If you drift too close to a whirlpool, you might not notice the pull at first.
But as you keep drifting, the momentum compounds until you are totally trapped and pulled under.
It's neuroplasticity. Every time you perform an action or think a passive thought, that neural pathway gets deeper.
Exactly. If you're a drifter, hypnotic rhythm automates your failure. It hardwires mental laziness into your brain.
That is terrifying. But there is one universal force that can violently snap a person out of it.
And ironically, it's the one thing the devil absolutely hates.
Like, really? The devil hates failure. That sounds so counterintuitive.
It does, because we are taught to avoid failure at all costs. But the devil hates failure and adversity.
Why?
Because failure breaks the grip of hypnotic rhythm. It forces the mind to clear itself of fear and make a fresh start.
Because failure proves that your current habit loop is broken.
Exactly. It is a man-made circumstance. The text says it's only a temporary defeat until you accept it as permanent.
It's a psychological circuit breaker.
I love that. Explain the circuit breaker.
Think about a house with an overloaded electrical system. If there's a massive surge, the circuit breaker violently trips and everything goes dark.
It's annoying. You're stumbling around in the dark.
Right, it feels like a disaster in the moment.
Yeah.
But that violent shutoff is the only thing preventing the entire house from burning down.
Failure is the breaker tripping.
Yes, it forces you to stop relying on automatic habits and start actively thinking again to reset the system.
The text uses Thomas Edison and Henry Ford as examples here.
Edison didn't have some magical immunity to failure. He failed thousands of times.
But he used failure as a stepping stone, a data point, rather than an alibi to quit.
So, if you have recently experienced a massive setback or a business failure, you have to reframe it.
It is not a permanent defeat. It is an equivalent benefit.
It's nature forcing you out of a drifting state so you can rediscover your independent thought.
Exactly. Which leads us to the ultimate question.
Right. If we know how the devil traps us with fear and drifting, how do we actively fight back?
How do we secure the perimeter of the mind?
The text gives us an antidote, doesn't it? The primary weapon against the devil.
It does. The core of all the principles mentioned is definiteness of purpose.
Definiteness of purpose. That sounds intense.
It is very aggressive. The devil admits he cannot control someone who uses their own mind with a definite purpose.
The text says something like, my opposition has everything to do with saving people through the power of independent thought, backed by definiteness of purpose.
When you set a goal, the text says you must not beg.
You demand what you want, and you insist upon exactly that with absolutely no substitutes.
Faith is definiteness of purpose, backed by unwavering belief. You dictate terms to life, not the other way around.
A drifter might have vague hopes or dreams, but they are just too lazy to use their faith.
Right. This is the difference between a laser and a light bulb.
Oh, I use this analogy all the time. Both use energy, right?
Right. But a scattered light bulb just warms up a room. Its energy is diffused in every direction.
It's easily overwhelmed. But a laser aligns all that exact same energy into one focused beam.
And because it's focused, it can cut through solid steel.
Definiteness of purpose is turning your mental energy into a laser.
You lock onto a goal and you burn the boats. You eliminate the alternatives.
So you need to decide definitely what you want from life, create a concrete plan, and sacrifice everything else rather than accept permanent defeat.
Stop being a passive consumer of your own life. Occupy the building.
Which really brings all these key ideas together into one massive, memorable insight.
The soul of this entire chapter is that true freedom is entirely an inside job.
The devil isn't a supernatural monster hiding under your bed.
No, it is the default state of a passive mind. When you surrender your initiative to fear, environment, or laziness, you become a drifter.
But the exact moment you claim your right to independent thought and absolute definiteness of purpose, you become immune.
You become immune to failure and fear.
So next time you find yourself scrolling endlessly on your phone, procrastinating on a big decision, or letting fear dictate your business strategy,
You really need to pause.
yeah, pause and ask yourself, who is actually doing the thinking right now?
Is it you or is it the squatter?
Now that you know exactly how the trap of drifting is set, you have absolutely no more excuses.
You know the mechanics.
Until our next deep dive into the exact mechanisms of hypnotic rhythm and how you can actually hack it to make your success automatic. Stay curious and keep demanding exactly what you want from life. Are you truly the author of your own thoughts? Or are you, just sleepwalking through life, reacting to circumstances and letting some unseen force make all your decisions for you?
I mean, that is the ultimate question, right? Most of us just assume we're behind the wheel of our own life.
Right.
But if you really look closely at human behavior, a lot of people aren't even holding the steering wheel. They're just passengers running on autopilot, completely at the mercy of whatever road they happen to be on.
Yeah, it's a terrifying thought. And so today we are jumping straight into chapter 4 of Napoleon Hill's honestly very controversial, long-hidden manuscript, Outwitting the Devil.
Specifically, we're looking at the chapter called Drifting with the Devil.
Exactly. And in this deep dive, you are going to learn about the hidden psychological traps that basically cause people to just surrender their ambitions.
And why mastering your own mind is really the ultimate competitive advantage, whether you're in business, entrepreneurship, or you just want to live a life that you actually direct yourself.
It's wild stuff. But before we get into the weeds, I do want to quickly set the stage for how we're approaching this today.
Yeah, that's definitely necessary.
Because the setup of this book is pretty unique. Hill is basically conducting this metaphorical interrogation. He's cornered the devil, and to be clear, he uses the devil just as a metaphor for all the negative limiting forces in the world.
Right, it's a literary device.
Exactly.
Mm.
And he forces this entity to confess its exact methods for controlling people's minds. But, and this is a crucial disclaimer here for everyone listening, the source material contains some really provocative viewpoints.
Very provocative.
Yeah. He goes hard against foundational institutions. He critiques the public school system, organized religion, standard parenting
It
practices.
really pulls no punches.
None. So we need to be clear. We are not endorsing these viewpoints. We aren't taking sides, left or right, on any of this.
Right, we're just impartially reporting on what's in the text.
Exactly. We're just unpacking Hill's written ideas as an intellectual exercise. Our mission in this deep dive is to extract the practical entrepreneurial gold from this crazy metaphor and figure out how to stop doing what he calls drifting.
Yeah, so let's start right there with drifting, because the devil makes this huge confession right at the start. He says his absolute greatest weapon for controlling human minds is the habit of drifting.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Because he defines a drifter pretty specifically, doesn't he?
He does. He says a drifter is someone who permits themselves to be influenced and controlled by circumstances outside of their own mind.
Wow.
Yeah, they're mentally lazy. They just accept whatever life throws their way without putting up a fight. And maybe most dangerously, they let other people supply their opinions for them. They don't think for themselves.
But wait, let me push back on that a little bit.
Go for it.
Isn't drifting just another word for like going with the flow? I mean, society usually praises people who are easygoing and adaptable, right? We literally tell people to stop being so rigid and just go with the flow.
It's a fair question, but there's a really important nuance here. Going with the flow, like in a healthy, adaptable way, is about adjusting your tactics. But drifting, in Hill's definition, is about a total abdication of responsibility.
Abdication. Okay, explain that.
It's laziness combined with indifference, and that combination equals procrastination. In the text, the devil actually says that man is the only creature that defies nature's laws by drifting.
Because animals just operate on instinct.
Exactly. They just follow the deterministic laws of survival. But humans have a prefrontal cortex. We have the capacity for independent thought, so drifting is actively choosing to shut that off.
Oh, that makes sense. It's like, okay, think about the difference between navigating a sailboat and just being a piece of driftwood.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. Because a sailboat is going with the flow of the wind, sure. It adjusts its sails to the current and the breeze, but it has a definite destination, is using the flow to get where it wants to go.
Whereas the driftwood
has no steering. It just goes exactly where the current forces it, and eventually it just gets smashed up against the rocks.
that is exactly it. The drifter is the driftwood. They have no internal compass. And so the practical takeaway for you listening is to really audit your own life right now.
Yeah, are you actively deciding your path?
Exactly. Are you steering the boat, or are you just accepting the opinions and circumstances handed to you?
It's a tough mirror to look into. But how do seasons start? Like, nobody decides they want to be driftwood, right?
No, they don't. And that leads to the devil's next big reveal. He claims he gains control of people's minds while they are young.
The infiltration of youth.
Right. He actually calls it his second best trick, even though chronologically it's the first thing he does. He says he uses parents, school teachers, and religious instructors to basically destroy a child's habit of independent thought.
And again, keeping our neutral hats on, this is where Hill's systemic critiques come in.
Yes. The text argues that schools teach kids to drift by just pushing them through a standardized system. There's no requirement for them to have a definite aim or figure out a specific occupation.
Just, sit in rows, memorize these facts, ring the bell, move to the next room.
Exactly. And on top of that, he claims parents just blindly pass down their own beliefs, religion, politics, how marriage should work, and by doing that, they fasten their own limitations onto their kids.
What's fascinating here is just how systemic this concept is. Hill is basically suggesting that our most trusted institutions, the ones meant to protect us, inadvertently act as agents of limitation.
Because they prioritize compliance over critical thinking.
Yeah, and this connects so deeply to entrepreneurship.
Huh.
I mean, think about the typical entrepreneur. They're usually the person who finally gets fed up, breaks out of that rote memorization mindset and just starts questioning the status quo.
Right. If you want to innovate, you can't just be compliant. It's almost like installing an operating system on a computer when you're a kid.
Oh, I like that. Break that down.
Well, if your childhood conditioning, your OS, is programmed to just accept external commands from authority figures without verifying them, then your system is incredibly vulnerable.
Right? There's no firewall.
Exactly. Any malware, which in this metaphor is the devil's negativity, fear, or limiting beliefs, can easily take over the system because the computer was never taught to scan for viruses. It just accepts whatever is downloaded.
Wow. So for the listener, this means it is absolutely vital to audit your inherited beliefs, especially in business.
Yes. If you're running your business or managing your team a certain way just because that's how I was taught or that's how it's always been done, you might be drifting.
You're running corrupted code.
You really are.
So, okay, let's say the OS is vulnerable. How does the devil actually exploit this in everyday adult life? Where do these traps show up?
The text details some very specific everyday arenas: health, marriage, occupation, and savings.
Let's hit health first, because this one surprised me.
Yeah, he says he induces people to overeat and eat the wrong foods. And this leads to indigestion, which destroys the power of accurate thought.
It sounds so old school. Indigestion destroys thought, but it's actually biologically true. When you eat a massive, terrible meal, your body routes all its energy to digestion. You get that brain fog.
Exactly. You become sluggish, and a sluggish mind is easy to control. Then there's marriage. He says he causes couples to bicker over money and intimacy.
Just constant friction.
Right, so they have absolutely no energy left to break the drifting habit. They're just exhausted.
And what about occupation? This was a big one.
Yeah, he says he tricks people into taking the very first job they find with no aim other than just making a living. And that keeps them in constant fear of poverty.
Okay, wait. Let me push back here again. Because taking the first job you find so you can literally survive, that is often a harsh economic reality. Especially in the 1930s when this was written.
Oh, absolutely.
So how is that drifting? It just sounds like basic survival, not a moral failure.
That's a really important distinction. The danger, according to the text, isn't in taking the survival job. The danger is taking it without having a long-term, definite aim.
Oh, I see.
Right. If the survival job becomes your entire horizon, if you stop looking beyond it, then the fear of poverty just locks you in. You stop striving.
It's like a business startup that's constantly just putting out daily fires.
Yes.
Like you're dealing with cash flow panic, partners bickering, supply chain issues, and you get so consumed by surviving the day that you totally forget to build a long-term product roadmap.
Exactly. You're surviving, but you're drifting because you lost the destination.
And he adds one more everyday trap here, dominating thoughts through mass media.
Oh, right. He mentions pulpits, newspapers, movies, and radio. Plant negative thoughts everywhere.
And imagine what he'd say about social media today.
Oh, it's the ultimate drifting machine. An algorithm literally feeding you outrage to keep you paralyzed. So the practical takeaway here is to look at your daily habits, your diet, your spending, your media consumption. Yeah, are these things giving you clarity and energy, or are they distracting you and keeping you mentally sluggish?
But here's the thing. People aren't stupid. How does the devil get us to actively choose the sluggish path?
Bribes.
Bribes.
Yeah. The devil explains that he enters a potential drifter's mind by offering bribes. He uses things people naturally desire: love, sex, the desire for money, gluttony, and vanity.
But wait, those aren't inherently evil things.
Yeah.
Wanting love or money is pretty standard human behavior.
That's exactly why it works. He plays both ends against the middle. These natural desires are the bait. He dangles them to intensify your desire and then uses that obsession to ensnare you.
Like dangling the idea of quick money and then snatching it away to cause despair.
Or, conversely, providing so much money that it leads to gluttony, laziness, and physical decline.
So what does this all mean for someone trying to build a business or a career? How does a non-drifter interact with these same desires? Because they still want money and love, right?
Of course they do. But the text notes a massive difference. The non-drifter takes what he wants from life on his own terms. The drifter takes whatever he gets on the devil's terms.
Ah, that is a huge distinction.
Think of it like the difference between getting a legitimate bank loan versus going to a pawn shop out of desperation.
Oh, I love that analogy. Break that down.
Well, the non-drifter is like a smart business owner going to a legitimate banker. They negotiate a fair rate, they have a solid business plan, and they borrow capital on terms that work for their long-term growth.
They dictate the interaction.
Right. But the drifter doesn't have a plan. They just have a desperate, immediate desire. So they hawk their future at a pawn shop. They accept terrible interest rates and awful terms just to get that quick hit of cash.
They compromise everything for the immediate gratification. So you can pursue wealth and success, but you must dictate the terms. You can't let your desires make you compromise your independent thought.
Exactly. Which naturally brings us to Hill's detailed profiles. He basically gives us a checklist to spot a drifter versus a non-drifter.
Let's run through these, because the profile of the drifter is painfully specific.
It really is. The defining trait is that the drifter lacks a major purpose in life.
Right.
From there, they lack self-confidence. They spend all they earn. They never save. They're often sick or complaining of ailments. They lack imagination and enthusiasm.
You have a bad temper, right?
Yep. And this is a great one. They have opinions on everything but accurate knowledge of nothing.
Oh, man. We all know that person.
They're a jack of all trades but a master of none. They criticize people behind their backs and flatter them to their faces.
It's just a classic victim mentality, isn't it?
100%. They blame everything on the economy or their boss or bad luck. Now contrast that with the non-drifter.
Okay, the non-drifts.
The non-drifter is always engaged in doing something definite. They have a major goal in life and they have minor goals leading up to it.
They operate on extreme ownership. No blaming others.
Exactly. They have a good memory. They frankly admit their ignorance when they don't know something, and they run the biggest business in town, either literally or metaphorically.
But there's a specific phrase Hill uses for the non-drifter that I found really interesting. He calls them a go-giver. Not a go-getter, but a go-giver.
Yeah, that flips the usual capitalist script, doesn't it?
It totally does. We're always told to be go-getters. Go out there and take what's yours. But true success, especially in modern entrepreneurship, is tied to providing service.
Right, providing immense value to the market.
Think about it in a workplace scenario. The drifter is the employee who complains at the water cooler, shoots down everyone else's ideas, and never offers any solutions.
Just sucking energy out of the room.
Exactly. But the non-drifter is the one who says, hey, I don't know the exact answer to this problem, but here's my plan to figure it out. They give effort. They give solutions.
The cure for being a drifter is literally to wake up and give. Render useful service to as many people as possible. Oh, and the most crucial trait of the non-drifter. They have a mind of their own, and they use it for all purposes.
They do their own thinking, always. But, okay, let's say someone is doing this. There's strong-willed, they have a purpose, they're providing service. Does the devil just give up?
Not even close. This is where we get into what he calls his ultimate snares.
The traps for the people who can't be bought with cheap bribes.
Right. If you resist the usual bribes of money or sex, he brings out the heavy artillery, flattery, failure, and propaganda.
Flattery feeds vanity, right?
Yeah. It's the chief bait for people who think they are too smart to be manipulated. You puff up their ego and they stop thinking critically.
And propaganda is using mass media to stir up conflict, which we touched on. But here's where it gets really interesting. Failure. The devil claims that failure is his absolute best trick to make people quit. The minute they meet opposition, the majority of people start to drift. But Hill argues against this. He says that every failure brings with it the seed of an equivalent success.
It's such a powerful reframe. The text actually uses Thomas Edison as the prime example.
Right, because he failed thousands of times trying to invent the light bulb.
Exactly. Edison converted failure into a stepping stone. A drifter looks at a failure and uses it as an alibi to quit. See? I tried, and the universe said no. But the non-drifter looks at failure as just data.
It's like lifting weights.
Oh, yeah, explain that.
Well, when you lift heavy weights, the resistance actually tears your muscle fibers down. It physically damages them.
Right, micro tears.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, if you just quit and stop working out, you're just injured and sore. But if you recover, adapt, and persist, the muscle grows back stronger because of that exact resistance.
That's brilliant. The failure is the resistance required for growth.
So when you encounter a setback in your career or your business, you have to immediately label it as temporary defeat, not permanent failure. And you have to search that defeat for the data, the seed of equivalent advantage.
Which is easier said than done, obviously, which is why the devil finally reveals his 8-point formula, the ultimate protection against drifting.
Let's go through this formula because it is incredibly actionable.
Point 1. Do your own thinking on all occasions.
Non-negotiable.
Point 2. Decide definitely what you want from life and create a specific plan to get it. Point 3, which we just discussed. Analyze temporary defeat and extract the seed of equivalent advantage.
Point 4 is about being a go-giver.
Right. Yes. Be willing to render useful service equivalent to the value you demand from life. Point 5. Recognize that your brain is a receiving set and keep it tuned to clear, positive thoughts.
Keep the malware out.
Exactly. Point 6. Recognize that time is your greatest asset. Point 7. Recognize that truth is the only thing that matters and do not fear it.
And point 8, this is the one I really want to focus on.
Yeah. Point 8 is massive. It says, be definite in everything you do and do not leave unfinished thoughts in the mind.
Unfinished thoughts. The danger of leaving decisions hanging. I think this leads directly to procrastination and drifting in the modern world more than anything else.
It absolutely does. In psychology, there's actually a name for this. It's called the Zeigarnik effect.
The Zeigarnik effect.
Yeah, it basically means that people remember uncompleted or interrupted tasks better than completed ones. When you leave a thought unfinished or a decision unmade, it literally drains your cognitive bandwidth. It stays open in the background of your brain.
Oh, man. It's like a computer with 100 browser tabs open.
Exactly.
You know, when you're working and you just keep opening new tabs, an email you need to reply to, an article you want to read, a project you need to plan, and you don't close any of them.
And what happens to the computer?
It slows the whole system down, the fan starts spinning like crazy, everything gets laggy, and eventually the browser just crashes.
Because it's out of memory?
Right. And definiteness of purpose, point 8, is closing the tabs. It's making a decision. You focus on one window. You either do the task, delegate it, or delete it. But you don't just leave it open to drain your energy.
Because when your mental energy is drained by all those unmade decisions, you become incredibly vulnerable to external pressures. You default to the path of least resistance. You drift.
So form the habit of reaching definite decisions. Say yes or say no, but stop saying maybe later.
It's about reclaiming your mental bandwidth.
So tying this massive amount of ground we've covered together into one core insight, what's the soul of Chapter 4?
I think the absolute core insight is that your mind is your only true possession. It is the only thing you actually have control over.
Everything else can be taken away.
Exactly. And drifting is the tragic act of just handing the keys to your mind over to someone else. You hand them to your environment, to your inherited fears, to the media, or just to pure laziness.
Failure doesn't come from a lack of talent or just having bad luck. It comes from this quiet, insidious habit of letting life happen to you, rather than steering the ship yourself.
It's the ultimate abdication.
So I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to really mull over. Look at the biggest challenge you are facing right now. In your business, your relationships, whatever it is. Are you just waiting for a solution to magically present itself?
Are you drifting?
Right. Or are you actively forcing nature to hand over her secrets through your own definite purpose?
That is the question you have to answer every single day. And if you think the habit of drifting is dangerous just on its own, wait until you learn how nature permanently locks that habit into place.
Oh, this is where it gets kind of scary.
Yeah. In our next deep dive, we are going to uncover the terrifying and powerful law that the devil calls hypnotic rhythm.
Hypnotic rhythm.
It is the universal force that takes your current habits, good or bad, and makes them nearly impossible to break.
You definitely do not want to miss that one. Until then, close those browser tabs, make definite decisions, and stop drifting. We'll see you next time.
What you just listened was the beginning of a full audio, way longer, explaining every single chapter of the book. If you would like to keep listening to the end and access to the full audio, you can access it with the link down below in the description and in the pinned comment.